Data Storytellers, we are here for a very, very special episode. In fact, a series of episodes with a guest who's the first person who ever appeared more than 2 times on the podcast. So in the studio, I have with me Dave Coughlin. Many of you know it. Dave, welcome on the show once again.
Thank you for having me. Now we've got a hat trick. So,
exactly.
Keep rolling from here.
Yeah, and with that kind of momentum, I think we'll go beyond the hat trick very, very quickly. This is a very special project that we're diving into, a very special journey that we are going to embark on. And I think in 2022, in our first episode, so I think we talked about your professional journey, some of the stories that you had about data science. We talked about storytelling. And then in 2023, we discussed your book, which is about essentially complementary skills from a career perspective, very much connected to our first topic. And now 2024, this is almost like a grand finale because we're going to dive into advanced business communications for data storytellers, and we have a whole roadmap and a playbook ahead of us. So maybe first we can just explore why we're doing this whole thing, what really prompted us taking pen and paper and putting this together.
Well, first, let's hope it's not actually a finale, more like a culmination or something.
Cool. Yeah,
we still got
fair.
Plenty of runway left professionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you and I have been talking to each other now for a couple of years, and we're both very passionate about effective communications. You run the Data Storytellers, which is literally about communications, and I'm been an executive for a while now, and I live and die by my communications. And you think about where we are, right? I mean, it's an election year. Constantly, the term fake news is going to start getting bandied about again, right? Like we exist in a place where there's tons of information, but there's very little truth, right? And getting truth, agreeing on truth, my truth, your truth, what's the truth, all of that kind of stuff is sort of like up for grabs, and it's chaotic, right? And so what are we going to do? What can we do, right? And so, let's bring that passion for great analytic communication to the fore and see if we can help convert some of this info into truth, right? And this is, with the acceleration of analytics, ChatGPT basically has everybody an AI expert now, right? Things are getting democratized, but they're getting democratized without training. They're getting democratized without background, without context. And so we're perpetuating and proliferating biases and blind spots. I can remember a previous role who shall not be named, right? But basically, hey, your job is to agree with me analytically, right? So that's no bueno now, man. We don't want to have that. And the analytic organizations are getting pinched, right? I just saw a survey from, I think it was Amazon Web Services, CDO survey. Mm-hmm. And there's a prevalent concern about being kind of pulled apart from the need to stay relevant in your field, whether that's embracing AI, deep learning, all of these very advanced esoteric techniques, because it seems like every time I blink, there's a new technology, there's a new technique, there's a new problem being solved, a new app, right? But then staying close to the business and that chasm that it creates sometimes. Right. I mean, I want to say like a third. I mean, don't quote me on this, but like a third of them said a major problem was they're doing all this stuff, but the business outcome, the impact, it's like, hey, man, you're paying these data scientists, $100, $200, $300,000 per year. And what are we getting for it? Right. So that's a major concern. And how do you address that if you're not at the table, you're not communicating effectively, right? So that's a super big opportunity, a big pain point for lots of CDOs in the Amazon survey. And that financial uncertainty, like, is data science having an impact? Is analytics having an impact? That's going to be exacerbated because I think every time you turn the news on, we're getting, well, there's going to be a recession this year, right? I think This week, it's Jan 19th. I think Citibank just laid off like 20,000 people. I mean, there's been layoffs. I mean, CVS laid some people off over the summer. I think Facebook last year laid off a bunch of people. So there's been some shedding as far as talent goes. And so, if you're wrong, or if your business sponsor's wrong, like, you're going to move up the queue when that, layoff comes. So the economic risk is probably as high as it's been, at least since I've had an executive perspective. And then finally, and this is the one that kind of bothers me the most as a professional, is, there's this warehouse all over the place, this metaphorical warehouse of analytic capabilities or good analytic capabilities, whether it's an app, whether it's a model, whether it's even just like a nice spreadsheet, and it just sits there unused because the wrong problem was solved for the wrong users. And so that's demoralizing. So there's this multi-threaded problem where you've got, like, macroeconomics are kind of crummy, right? You've got the senior-most people in analytic organizations feeling pressured to show value. You've got the doers, the actual data scientists, building all this wonderful stuff, and then it doesn't get used, or it doesn't hit the money. And so that's why, the common thread that I think we can pull through all of this to try to smooth a lot of that out, good communication. And that's why it's never been more important.
Absolutely. And just to kind of riff on that a little bit, I just read today, I don't know if it's true, it's like reportedly Sports Illustrated fired all of their staff. Like, all of their staff. Yeah. And even if it's not fully true, because I haven't had the time to read the article. And again, we live in a post-truth world. But anyways, the trend is huge. Even Disney, they let go of so many of their employees. And then how that ties into also AI and data science is that now we're navigating in a corporate landscape, in a corporate atmosphere that is super anxious. And even when people think that, oh yeah, ChatGPT AI, I gotta be on the ball with that. So there's that kind of excitement about it and hype. Deep down, people are actually very anxious, and they are concerned and oftentimes confused. So that huge opportunity that targets this pain point that, from my perspective, data analytics leaders have is really to add value through introducing a lot of clarity and a lot of intent and direction into this landscape, which is not at all a technical endeavor, right? I mean, you would think that data analytics and data science, it's all about like building the platforms. That's fantastic. And yeah, I mean, data analytics leaders, I get to watch it from the front row, what amazing solutions they can build. But this is a whole different dimension of value that they can add to actually push the envelope and get those solutions to have the true business impact. So when we talk about the gap and the gap between the business and data, it's being thrown around a lot, but it's very, very real. And I still don't think that the opportunity is being truly appreciated here. And also the risk, there are like huge risks here that things can go wrong very, very quickly. And as you said, at least in the past, decade, we haven't been in an economic environment that is as kind of tense than what we're going into now. So just wanted to kind of add that as a layer.
I agree. And, this gap that you're talking about, like, that's the thing that's been the rock in my shoe for a long time, probably 10 years, right? I coined it the action gap. And, when I first started training data scientists in communication, like, calling it the action gap helps to visualize where things fall short or they fall into the gap, right? So, the action gap, just to define it, it's when the analytic deliverable fails to achieve the business impact, right? And why does that happen? Because the data scientists, they have the data, they crunch the data, they get to an empirical truth. Now, it may need to be tempered with context, right? Because there's always things like spurious findings, but this is empirical. Like, this is not made up. This isn't someone's gut. This isn't somebody who has seen 5 examples and then they're going to shoot from the hip. Like, this is, thousands of examples, millions of examples, right? This is well researched. the field of statistics, the field of machine learning is, some of the smartest people in the world are constantly trying to move that thing incrementally forward. And yet there's this gap, right? And then what happens is the people look at the analytic professionals like, okay, well, it's your fault to fell in the gap. And so in an environment which is now heightened by, AI is going to, the AI boogeyman, right? AI is going to take your job, and companies looking to shed in a recession, right? Every time something falls in the gap, you're looking at potential pain. And so how can we cross the gap, but like what's causing things to fall in the gap, right? So that's the insights that were ignored, right? Hey, I think that we should, expand into Florida instead of Texas because of all of this empiricism. Well, we're going to Texas anyway because it feels better. Oh, okay. Or, hey, here's the model says these are the best prospects to go after. Oh, that's great. I'm going to go after those prospects over there. And then the campaign falls flat. And why is it happening? Well, in those two examples, it's a clashing of truths, right? And the part of the reason why the analytic truth failed, even though it's grounded in empiricism, is lack of proper packaging, lack of alignment, or a failure to resonate with the audience. And that's typically what's opening the gap, right? Because if I said something like, we need to go to Florida because my data says so, and you say, we're going to Texas because my instinct says so, but then you're probably going to be able to say, well, my instinct says we're going to go make more money or some other great outcome. And that's what triggers the resonance. This is a very superficial example. But if I'm just, well, no, we're going to Florida because the demographics are more favorable, the weather is more favorable, like I'm getting very close to like the why. So it's like facts upwards as opposed to like outcome downwards or outcome backwards. And that's where a lot of times the communication falls apart. And that's really why, you and I were talking before we started this, we were like, hey, let's build the bridge over the gap. And it's a communications gap. It's not a technical gap, right? You can move from, say, a linear regression to a random forest and pick up some accuracy, but that's not going to get you over the hump or get you across that gap, rather. What's going to get you across that gap is you're going to package whatever the answer is, whether it's a regression or whether it's a random forest or whether it's an XG boost, in a way that's going to get the business excited. And that's what this is all about.
So true. And I actually never thought about it this way, just now that we're having this conversation, is that, when people say, oh, my pain is that we build amazing solutions in the business, but they're not using it. So that's like a cultural issue here, lack of understanding. And that's a great question to ask. Did they not use your solution because the algorithm was not accurate enough? Or even something that people often say, the data quality, that's a huge pain point. Well, did they not use their solution because your data quality wasn't there? I'm not questioning that the data quality could be improved to get even better results, but is that the actual cause of your pain? And might I add that when there is that adoption gap, action gap, why it's such a risky proposition, and I think it will be accentuated also this year, because when these companies grow now, become more conservative in spending money on new solutions, right? They've been super bullish. Everyone needs to ride the trend. Now it will be a time to consolidate everything and squeeze out as much value from the already made investments as possible, right? Now the spotlight will be on the data analytics leaders as, hey, wait a second, like why are we spending without impact, right? And in that case, again, if you think about your pain, and the reputation risk of the solutions are not being used, again, it might be that from your perspective as a data analytics leader, you see under the hood that the data quality is not right? But that shouldn't be your main priority. Don't get me wrong, get your data quality in shape, right? And all that. But first things first, of how do you close the gap first so that you can actually make your data quality count in the end, right?
I love that. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Trying to get all of the pennies sorted when there's dollars over there with the data, over rotating on data quality versus just solving the right problem in the right way with the right justification. I mean, the problems that data science are best suited for are high frequency, low severity problems. And so you don't need perfect data. You don't need a perfect model. You have to be better than randomness. So like, I don't think people appreciate how low the bar can be in some of these problems, right? And so the fun and exciting part, this is something I teach all my mentees, like the fun and exciting stuff for us is getting that extra, like, that little extra bit of R squared, or that little bit of extra, precision and recall. But really it's just like, package it so that you can just be better than randomness. Because that's really what I mean, here at my current company, like we're probably going to look at 10,000 openings. So we're going to have 10,000 shots to win. When we were doing my last company, we would probably get 50,000 chances to win. And these are like comparatively relatively, like they're big ticket, slow moving objects, right? But you're still getting thousands and thousands. And imagine if you're on like e-commerce, where you're getting like thousands and thousands per hour, potentially. How many people are constantly blasting Amazon's website, right? So like those are wonderful opportunities for data science. But you're trying to just be better than random. You're not trying to get to 100% accuracy. So I think your point about over-rotating on data quality is super astute.
And in a big company, better than random, even if the margin is not huge, it's a lot of dollars. It's a lot of dollars exactly. if you can actually assert that impact, but only then, right? And you could be like 99.97% accurate without that impact. Again, no dollar sign. So I think we got the message too on that.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I mean, you want to talk about when it doesnn't happen, so we can ground ourselves in misses, right? I guess, so that we can show how this gets better, right? So not just are we two fans of communication, we're two communicators, and so. I got some examples as I was thinking about today about how I wanted to talk about where the communication didn't work.
Absolutely, because even like up to this point, it's still, I mean, we're looking at the world and making these assessments, but it's always best to convey that in a story, and I think you have a lot of them.
Oh yeah, that's part of the grays in the beard, right? So let me tell you about an example. This is a real example of when you have the beautiful model, you've got the beautiful application, you've got users that like what you're doing for them, and yet you've got a failure to get credit for the impact, right? So this is one of those situations where the powers that be say, okay, we're spending money on this team, work is happening. No one denied the work was happening, and there is use. No one denied the use was happening, but couldn't get an impact to hang off of it. It ultimately did. It did hurt. So let me make this a little bit more specific. So it's a sales analytics space. That's my background, right? That's my bailiwick, and we're trying to find the best prospects out of approximately 2 million potential customers. Now there's 2 million entities that can buy the product. Our self-assessment, it's a biased assessment, right? This is the clashing of the truths, right? We had a 9-digit impact, right? And to get as far underneath that as we could, make sure we had bedrock, we did 2 different ways of quantifying that, and both of them pointed towards 9-digit impact. So the first was straight up chain of custody. You signed into my app, I saw that you logged on, I saw what you did, and if any of those prospects popped up on the other side with a sale, I said, hey man, I was part of that party. I mean, I didn't host the party, but I was there, or I brought the cups or something like that. The second way we did it was we said, okay, well, not everybody uses it. So what if we just separated the users from the non-users and see if there's any lift, any wins above replacement? And anyway, wins above replacement. Okay, and again, both pointed at 9-digit impact. It's a massive market, massive product. So like 9 digits is great relative to our cost basis, but I mean, it wasn't something where you're like, wow, you tripled the size of the company. It's good impact, but not earth shattering. So we had the impact self-assessed internally. We said, hey, this is great. Let's go over to the business side and get credit from the business, right? Because we're trying to get more investment, trying to get more headcount, trying to get more resources. And the business, which generally was like, hey, thanks for building this. Oh, could you sign off on an impact number? No. Okay, how come? Well, you're not really showing causality. And I said, well, that's fair, but short of me physically selling, like, what is causality really in this context? I mean, we're coming at it from two different ways, right? So from like an empirical point of view where you can't do like a controlled experiment, this is pretty good, right? But that was the one of the main pushbacks was you can't prove that your insights are winning deals that we would not have won otherwise, because, you know, we're huge and people like to shop with us. It's like, okay, I mean, that's difficult to swallow, but I guess it's fair. I couldn't get underneath that counter perspective, which is like, look, there's only 4 people that can sell this product. So like, how much of a difference are you really making? I'm not physically selling it, so sure. And the second one was, you guys can't be winners if everyone else is losing. And that was a bit of that was a very difficult pill to swallow, because, you know, like I said, we were kind of coming at this from, we built this thing, we had users, we had impact, we had testimonials, but the whole business unit missed budget. So if the whole business unit misses budget, like, you can't have the analytics team crowing that we're the best thing to ever happen to this company and we need more investment because we're causing all of this growth, when on the whole we weren't net growing. So why do I bring both of these up? Well, if I take a step back and I examine it through the lens of some of the communication stuff that we're going to look at in the future sessions, there's some pretty big failures here that in hindsight I can see very obviously, but in the moment I was too close to it to separate. So the first was a pretty big gap in explaining why this statistical evidence should have supported the conclusion that we drove impact. I think there was a bit of an intractable gap, the action gap, where we had all of this empirical evidence that showed we were helping, and there was this sort of other side of it that said, well, you didn't physically sell it, or you didn't show that it was a win above replacement, or like, there's only 4 of us, so, you know, you can't prove it. I think if we had pivoted methodology or tried to agree up front what the methodology would have been, instead of constantly arguing from the back foot, we might have been able to get through that. All right. But there's sort of a failure to impress upon our counterparts why these were the right ways to measure the value and not other ways. But even that aside, because that's a bit of a technical versus technical debate, we did a real miss in trying to crow or declare victory in an environment where, like I said, everybody was kind of losing, right? Where everybody was missing budget, right? We weren't thinking about the big picture politically. We weren't thinking about the big picture economically. And so we're here just saying, you know, give us all this extra investment. We're a cost center, make us a bigger cost center. Meanwhile, everyone else is sort of scraping and fighting for their lives because the whole business unit was kind of suffering. So it was just like a tone deafness or context insensitivity that, looking back, I kind of cringe a little bit, like, oh man, I definitely could have done a way better job at that whole thing instead of trying to fight. So, you know, probably something like, well, hey, maybe we could show an analysis where the decline has been lessened by our contributions instead of trying to declare victory, like, which was just so divorced from reality. So that looking back, that was a big one. And this had real consequences. So like the team stagnated. We didn't get any incremental investment, and, you know, actually started to downsize because we couldn't get that compelling, budget controller support for the impact. We're going to talk more about this in future sessions, but the things that we're going to cover that I wish I was keeping sharper or more top of mind back then was essentially the game theory of these meetings, right? So essentially, I'm throwing rock into their paper, and the more they threw paper, the harder I threw rock, right? If I had sat and really thought about how I wanted to approach this, I might have figured out what the scissor argument was to their paper. I know it's kind of a silly metaphor, but that's basically like how it feels looking back, right? And then probably co-opting some into the business advocates to try to build a coalition so that we'd have a little bit more strength in numbers against some of the counterparties that were few in number but fairly influential. I think we started to get that coalition a little bit too late, but if we had maybe led with that or kept them handy throughout the process, we might have done better. So we'll learn a little bit about some of that stuff in the future, but those definitely. So my game theory was completely neglected, and my coalition building was neglected as well.
And I love approaching this from that angle, like game theory. And again, now that we're having this conversation, like a lot of dots connect in my mind. We had someone on the podcast called Dejan Mitkovsky, and Dejan is the VP of Data and Analytics over at FanDuel. And he mentioned that because he was like head of analytics at Google and like a very, very like competent leader. And he said that during his career, he had a situation where he had a big year. He did a lot of things, built a lot of things. And he had his annual performance review, and he sat down, went in excited. He listed all the things that he did during the year. And the boss said that, well, that's great. And that's fantastic. So let's now look at what you achieved. And Dan was like, what do you mean? Like, I just told you all these things that I've done, right? And the boss said, yeah, sure. But, my question was, what have you achieved? And then actually achievement is a whole different thing. So when you mentioned this, I immediately thought about Kobe Bryant, right? Where the guy was like a stat machine, meaning that he, had like a 9-game string of 60 plus points, like 50 plus points, 81 points, but he was constantly dissatisfied until he got the championships, because the championships were the right angle to look at this from. I think that's why he's a greater player than LeBron James, but let's just leave it at that for now. I know.
Below if you think that LeBron is Kobe.
So I know this is a controversial statement. So in order to not to alienate a huge portion of the audience, maybe we can talk about it another time. But anyways, my point being is that you got to look at it from like, what is that right measure of success? And another member of ours, he was also on the podcast, Alex Dragon, who is now the VP of Global Data and Analytics at Four Seasons. And he said, I really liked when he said that often what we do ends up being a situation when we say that, hey, the surgery was successful, but the patient died. So,
yes,
we did all this success. I mean, we followed the right things. We did the right things, right? I mean, the patient died, but at the same time, I mean, it was a huge success, right? You can't have it. You can't have it both ways. And this very often happens with analytics leaders. But once you actually focus on the right outcome, now you're going into these meetings armed. And I think your analogy with throwing the rock in their paper is very, very accurate. So no, I love that. And then even thinking about these meetings, it sounds like, oh, I'm throwing a rock in their paper. Is this kind of like an adversarial situation, even though we should be all about collaboration? Well, this is business in a way, like performance focused. So if you want to contribute, naturally there will be these situations where your actual impact and achievement will be tested, not just in terms of what you've done and the things and the input that you did, but the demonstrable outcomes and the achievements from that point of view of what matters. So what actually matters, which is the championship, which in business would be, whatever is aligned with the corporate vision, whatever winning means in that way.
It's kind of like in my book, I talk about being impact oriented, being outcomes oriented, and that's a big switch. Kind of like that executive that you mentioned, like, oh, look at all the things I did or I built, and then the senior leader's like, well, so what? Like, what happened, right? And so, I knew enough to focus on the impact, right? 9-digit impact. I wasn't saying like give us investment because we built an app. I said give us an investment because we got 9 digits. So I had the right what, I just don't think I had the right how, right? And I think that's the next level, right? So if you think about who this is for, right? This is for people who are already in those leadership roles. They got there because they were impact oriented, but now it's about growing organizations, whether it's you're contributing to an overall growth or just growing your own remit. And that's going to come from how you package everything, because now it's all going to be multi-threaded. And your point about like, is it adversarial? Like it's not adversarial in the sense that like you're going to go home and hate each other, or like they're like, or you're going to have like a training montage, like you're Rocky and you got a picture of them on your mirror. So there's nothing like that, but it is zero sum. In many ways, budget is zero sum. So like an extra $100,000 for data science is an extra $100,000 that was taken away from HR, from financing, from accounting, right? If I get a chair, that's one or two chairs that don't get filled somewhere else. So they've got, the senior leaders have to figure out which chair is going to have the most impact. So that's ultimately what it is. Like we're all talking about impact. Anybody at that director plus level is going to be impact oriented, is going to have an impact story to tell. But how you package it, which is really, probably a solid half of what we're going to get to when we start training the synthesis and stuff, it's how you package it. This is bad package. This is a great message with bad packaging. Ultimately, that's what happened.
Absolutely. And just because I'm also thinking still about the basketball analogy, is that, if you want to be on the starting team, one thing you can do is that, hey, coach, like I have all these stats, I grabbed all these rebounds and, I have 2.1 steals a game and, I'm averaging over, 20 points. Well, that's one way. And, I'm not like fully dismissing that. That's like part of your argument, but the argument should be that, coach, with me, we're winning the games. And in fact,
right.
We're getting to the playoff and we're winning the championship. Now that's an argument. And look, if you work or you play for a team that values individual stats over championships, maybe you need to play for another team.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So how about, let's talk about when it works, right? It's enough weeping over spilled milk, right? Let's talk about, so we're going to switch sports. I wanted to call this section batting 1,000. So now we're going to go in the other direction. So you talk about basketball, talk about baseball. So this is fairly recent, right? So much more mature, sort of been able to wipe the fog out of my eyes a bit in same area, right? Sales analytics, right? Now it's on a deal by deal basis. What helps us to close more deals? Okay, so if my last problem example was who should we call on, this one is we're already talking to them. What can we do to try to close the deal? Okay, so we performed this beautiful study. I was very proud of how it came out. It was one of the first studies that my junior data scientist had done in a professional setting. We used the epidemiology toolkit, so we're using contingency tables, hazard ratios, which is super fun because that was my original background when I started doing data science. But we're using it in a sales context, which catches a lot of people by surprise. So we're already kind of like we're creating this notion of intrigue because it's like, oh, wait a minute, like you're treating sales like a public health problem, so to speak. So let me hear how you're doing that. So we're doing the study, we're getting these hazard ratios, and we do the presentation to the executive team, and it was multi-level, immediate adoption. And we've been cascading it ever since in various flavors. We're changing the way that the sales force renders things. We've been going to multiple meetings as we kind of work our way down and out through the organization. And because that was like the first big project that we delivered, it laid a super solid foundation for investment. We just bought a ton of new data that we're going to be able to do even more data science on top of now because of that quick win, basically using the data that they already had, right? And so why does this matter? Why does this go right? Well, everything that we did, so this was a heavy amount of reconnaissance up front. Right? Hey, what are your buttons? What are you looking for? Why does my team exist? How can we add value in a quick way? And we have these big, hairy problems that we're going to get to eventually. We have to build up to those. But when they sit down and they're like, listen, I got to close more sales, period. I got to get my close rate up. 1 point of close rate is worth, I think it was like $10 million of margin. So it's like every time you can move that needle 1 percentage point, we're going to pick up, 10 mil. It's like, oh, okay. Let me show you how to pick up those percentage points. So literally, it was like the KPI that I needed to measure for was given to me, and I give it right back with the study, right? Instead of, vague or me trying to guess what the right answer was, I got it straight from the horse's mouth. Okay, great. Then what we did was we got some champions from the sales organization, some of our top salespeople, and we sat with them and we validated everything. We made sure that none of this stuff was spurious, none of this stuff was inactionable, because you can find stuff that's materially affects the outcome, but it's content. Like, I'll give you an example, completely inactionable. Rural hospitals, because we work with hospitals, they're more likely to buy our service. Well, that's great, but I can't make you rural. Like, if you're in downtown Boston, I can't knock you over to Springfield, right? So that's not actionable. So we made sure every single thing was actionable, and that every single thing made sense, and that the magnitude made sense. We found some really surprising stuff. I'm not going to divulge it here just because it's, where we are now, and some of it's proprietary, right? But everything was vetted. We had allies. So we're at the meeting, and it wasn't just us presenting it. Like, people were like, yeah, I remember that. You told me that, and I'm excited about that, and I agree with you. And they're almost like co-presenting in the meeting. You couldn't ask for a better outcome, right? And so looking back at this forensically, again, trying to use that forensic ability, right? I threw a scissor right into the paper, right? Why? Because I assessed the culture and what people wanted. I made sure that I knew there were 4 decision makers. What are your goals? Now, they have incredible alignment among themselves, which makes it easy because it's really like one stakeholder with 4 heads as opposed to, 20 stakeholders with 20 heads and 20 perspectives and 20 different agendas. So that was, is an easier problem to solve. I don't want to make it sound like, it's just me, right? Different problem. But that perfect alignment of what I'm talking about and what they want to hear absolutely made this thing land. And then having that relationship with some of those like those high profile salespeople, because they're already like everyone's favorite because they're the high performer salespeople. So having that double validation and knowing how to speak the language immediately, this landed, and it was a very, very fast turnaround. So it was very, very successful. And so we're just building on top of that now. I can't wait to see what we're going to do in Q1 because that's what we're starting with.
Amazing. And I think, previously we also spoke about a bunch of, aspects of this also on the previous podcasts. And then, there's the whole idea of, what kind of projects you prioritize and how. But even after that, if I think about it and I look at even what we're talking about now, it's almost like the weapons grade focused encapsulation of the highest leverage items on all the previous podcasts as well. So it comes down to communication and telling the right story to the right people at the right time, the right way.
Yes, I think the right way is probably where I've leveled up personally, even just in our little 2-year journey together. It's how to package it. And I think that's really the difference maker. Really listening, really making sure I'm speaking their language when I give it back. And then the action gap gets a lot smaller here than it's ever been.
Absolutely. And then now we're looking at, so basically telling a great story. So storytelling is kind of like a buzzword. It's being thrown around, especially when we talk about data storytelling. Even our name is a little bit misleading in a way. The data storytelling often is, okay, I have a few graphs. How do I, present it so that it kind of makes sense, with little anecdotes. But data storytelling, from where I'm looking at it, and especially now what we're talking about it in the context of business communications, is much, much, much bigger than that, and much, much more impactful. So it's almost like that kind of data storytelling when you're explaining graphs and all that, it's, drop in the ocean. It's like actually what kind of context you create around that is everything. And it has to do with, building the right relationships, how to sell these ideas well, how to influence the right stakeholders. And it's all driven by good practice communication in general. So basically, as now we're moving into like actually what we're going to hash out over this series is that we're going to define effective communication and then analyze both the art and the science of that, because a lot of it is art, right? So a lot of it is actually some of those intangibles, which again can be like structured in a way that will be applicable, but also there's a lot of science underneath. Like if you open up the hood of how people make decisions to begin with, how they relate to each other, there's a lot that happens on the neurochemical level that is actually not redundant at all, and it's not just something that's interesting, but highly applicable because it will kind of make everything connect. And then basically with this, we'll also translate all that exploration of the underlying concepts into something that's incredibly useful and practical for data analytics leaders. So it will be like academic in a sense, in a good way, in a good way, when we're going to demonstrate the validity of these ideas and these techniques first, but then we'll actually map it onto the day-to-day of data professionals at all levels. So whether you're a data analytics leader or whether you're a contributor on the team, or you're an aspiring leader, this will be like highly practical and actionable. And so this the analysis and the playbook will be grounded in the perspective, experience, and needs of analytics and data science professionals, aka data storytellers. So also the kind of books that we're going to look at and some of the materials, they are available and out there, but we're going to digest and process and condense it in a way that it will specifically accommodate and cater to data professionals. And that's why it's called advanced business communications for data storytellers.
That's right. So yeah, we're gonna basically carve off the steaks from the side of beef, and we're gonna serve those up. You're more than welcome to get the full side, but I think we're gonna keep the metaphors coming fast and furious as we sort of have fun with this communication. But once we're done, right? Because we're gonna have this beautiful theoretical basis. We've got some serious heavy hitters that we both enjoy. We're gonna analyze their works and try to, like we said, cleave off those fillets, and then that tactical thing. I think you put the idea, like the idea in my head. Might have been like a year ago at this point, having this like field manual of taking all the best stuff that you've gathered, that I've gathered, me through my work in industry, yours through the data storytellers. I've got this like corpus of just great insights plus the greats, and then being able to distill that down into something that's portable. So, when we're done, anybody that's kind of going through this journey with us, they have a clear understanding of the art and the science of effective communication. We're going to come at it from a whole bunch of different perspectives. We've got, not to jump too far ahead, but Cialdini is a psychologist. If I recall correctly, Chris Voss was a hostage negotiator. You've got Oren Klaff, who's an investment banker. And then you've got, Dave McCraney, who's just like, some sort of uber academic, I think, or like, it's like a science journalist type guy. It's tough to put McCraney in a category, but he writes a bunch of really cool stuff. So he definitely deserves a spot. And then we're going to turn that into the field manual, right? And so it's like a very clearly like scenario by scenario, like here's what to do, here's how to think about it. So you can avoid some of those mistakes where you're throwing rocks into people's paper and you're just throwing scissors every time. I think I'm going to keep that rock, paper, scissors metaphor going. It's fun.
It's a universal one. Yeah, it's highly applicable.
Yes, and it's not as controversial as saying Kobe's better than LeBron.
Okay, but at the same time, when I talk about Kobe Bryant, I'm talking to someone sitting in Boston. So obviously, there are emotions in this. I know I should have built my story in a way to bring your guard down first, but I get where you're coming from.